Hello, hunters! Today, I want to talk about the maps that we have between World and Rise, and more specifically, which one has better maps. The core feature of Monster Hunter is in the name. You hunt monsters, but you'd be a fool to think that is the only thing that matters, because there are a ton of other features present that contribute to the overall immersion and purpose of the game. Think of it like a tree with its interrelated roots. The tree itself would be the monsters which you hunt, and the roots of the tree would be all the features of the game connecting to or having a link to the monsters in some shape or fashion. This means such things as your hunter, the weapons, villages, your companions, and the one that I'm discussing in this video, the maps. I want to compare the maps that we've gotten from World and Rise, and this will be interesting because I never really thought too hard about the maps. I just get thrown into them and I run straight to the monster to start hunting it. I never really took the time to think about how the map affects my experience in hunting the monster. So how about we get to it then? To begin, I'm going to go over the maps of World. By and large, I feel these were beautifully made. The amount of detail that was put into making these feel like a real ecosystem, it's extremely admirable. There is so much to explore and so much to see, whether it be the locales in the map or interactions that the monsters have within them, adding to the player's overall immersion. This may be even more so for a player like me, who started playing Monster Hunter before Gen 5. If you were a Monster Hunter fan when World's trailer dropped, your jaw dropped to the floor. Going from these pixelated maps with rune transitions to these fleshed out and polished maps without rune transitions is a huge difference. It wasn't just a new Monster Hunter game, it was a whole new Monster Hunter. I don't know about all of you, but every time that I went into a map for the first time, I spent quite a good amount of time just exploring before actually doing the main objective. I even accidentally found the Prism Hercudrome within the first 3 minutes of me truly playing the game. This brings me to one of the great things about the maps of World though. All the endemic life throughout the map that you can capture and use for personal display inside your houses. Odds are, you try to catch a ton of these endemic life yourself. What is even more fun is trying to get your hands on the rare ones. Trying to hunt down these rare endemic life can be kind of fun and provide you with a little activity aside from the usual slaying or capturing of the monster. I feel that overall, having the endemic life scattered all around the map was a really nice touch, and it gave the players a separate objective that revolved more around the maps rather than the monsters. Another great part about the maps of World were the fact that the monsters had so many interactions within the maps themselves, which added another level of realism that gave the players insight to the monster's ecology. Being able to see the monsters interact with the ecosystem was something of wonder, especially since it was never something in Monster Hunter before. And while having these interactions may not mean much of anything for some people, there are those who really appreciate this fine detail and would spend a lot of time just secretly following a monster unnoticed, just so they could see if the monster had some special interaction with its environment. This is one of those features that doesn't impact the gameplay, but it adds a nice little pastime if you want to take a break from hunting, or if you're planning to leave in say 15 minutes or something. You could just tag along with a monster and just observe it. The third and last part of World Maps that I'm going to bring up, because I don't want this to be too long, is the environmental traps that you can use during combat to your advantage. This entails the Vine Trap and the Dam in the Ancient Forest, the Sand Trap of the Wildspire Waste, whatever the watery, mushroomy things of the Coral Highlands are, the Lava Geyser of the Elder Recess, and I'm going to group any sort of fallable debris like rocks or stalactites into one category for brevity. It is always satisfying to use any of these environmental traps because it almost always gives you an edge in battle while also providing a sense of realism. Plus, some of these are extremely fun to interact with, such as the Dam in the Ancient Forest, washing both you and the monster all the way down the cliff. Oh, so much fun. Or the Sand Hole in the Wildspire Waste, which needs to be set up with the Diablos. That one's really satisfying because it's quite particular. All in all, these brought us a sense of realism and a flair to combat, as well as a fun way to incorporate some potential strategy into your fight. Now, while there is plenty of good things about World's maps, there are also some drawbacks. Monster Hunter introduced verticality in the 4th generation, but it never really went too far with it. just some ledges here and there to hop off of to do some aerial damage, as well as some climbable spots to make the map a little less flat. World, however, took the idea of verticality and basically built a whole ecosystem around it. This is something that I personally was not too big a fan of. It adds this whole new dynamic of having various layers to the map that couldn't really be seen with pre-Gen 5 due to the room transitions. It makes each room feel more connected and not separate identities. For example, the Rotten Vale has its top, middle, and bottom layer, all of which is connected through paths or cliffs that you could jump off to get to a different level. While this is not necessarily bad, it can make getting around and traversing the map kind of a task in of itself. More specifically, the Ancient Forest. I don't think I even had to explain this one. Verticality is a blessing and a curse. It adds so much more depth into where and how you are fighting, but it can also be a detriment. With Monster Hunter being an action-based game that revolves around hunting, the maps and world are vast, and sometimes it can be a nuisance when trying to make your way to the monster, or what I want to point out more so right now is when fighting the monster. There are certain spots on some maps that are just downright frustrating or annoying, for me at least, to hunt at sometimes. This is because there are too many ledges or slopes that interrupt the flow of the combat, or maybe there's just a spot on the map you just don't particularly enjoy fighting at. One that specifically stands out to me is Room 9 in the Ancient Forest. I hate fighting anything there because the whole spot is basically nothing but a slope, and when I want to attack the monster but instead start sliding down and do an aerial attack, that's really annoying. There are some other rooms that I experienced this in as well, such as Room 8 in the Wildspire Waste or Room 12 in the Coral Highlands. Either way, I am not a fan of very sloped areas where you fight the monsters. Another annoying part about these maps, this one being more so with multiplayer, is with having a ton of different layers in a single spot. So many times when hunting, I will experience a time where the monster and you keep swapping layers because it will go up to attack another player that's on a different level than you, and right as you get up to that level, it goes back down to the previous level that you were trying to fight at, and this loops a couple times till you eventually give up and just stop moving till it comes to you. I don't know if this is something else that has happened to anyone else too much, but I certainly noticed it happening to me a lot. Well, those are some of the more prominent issues that I have when it comes to the maps of world. I think there's this sort of inverse relationship when it comes to having luscious ecosystems for the maps versus not, that it can create some issues when it comes to the verticality, which can have a large impact on the overall gameplay. Maybe you don't feel this way, but that's my thought on it. So, now saying what I thought about the maps of world, I want to move on now to assessing how Rise's maps fare in comparison. Now, I just want to start off by saying that the maps of Rise are, of course, not as full as the ones in World, but this does not make them bad by any means. And if anything, I think it can make them better through the open combat areas, the ease of traversability, the endemic life, and just simply how well the wire bugs were taken into consideration when designing these maps. Whenever fighting a monster in one of the maps in Rise, it is almost always done in a flat, open area, which I think is extremely nice because there is often very little disturbance to the flow of the fight. Personally, this is something that I find so much more favorable as compared to World. It gives you a lot more wiggle room to not only fight within, but also position yourself for attacks or other things such as traps. Having small corridors where you fight the monster can be quite a nuisance because it could lead to being stuck in a corner with the monster beating your hunter to a pulp, and this is something I've never had to deal with in Rise. Another reason this feels nice is because it reminds me more of the maps we had before World came out. All of them were more or less just flat areas where it was just you and the monster dueling it out. The flatter, more open areas are not only more convenient, but it brings this sort of old school vibe, which is quite enjoyable. Another thing going off of this is how all the maps in Rise are so much more traversable as compared to World. I know exactly where everything is in Rise, and I never get lost or have no clue which path takes me where. The map is pretty straightforward as there's little layering involved, so even if you don't know exactly where to go, the map is easy enough to read that you should be able to find the way if lost. This is probably just a quality of life thing that makes it so you are not scrambling around trying to find the monster, as you can quickly transition from fighting a monster in one room to another, as there's no huge obstacles in the path to where you need to be. A third part of the maps in Rise that I really like are the endemic life spewing all about that you can pick up as you transition from one room to the next. I'm already chasing the monster, so why not take a small detour to collect some spear birds or a paratoad along the way to assist me in battle? This is pretty convenient, and it's a way to incorporate areas on the map that would otherwise be unused for fighting to actually have a purpose. Having the endemic life encourages you to explore your surroundings so you can know exactly where everything is stationed, so you can minimize the time it would take you to go and grab it while transitioning between rooms or in the beginning of the hunt. It offers a small amount of strategy on how you're going to play out the hunt while it begins as well as during the hunt. The last upside that I want to mention relates to the endemic life, and that is just how the maps seem designed specifically with the wire bugs in mind. There are so many different climbable spots on the map that prove useful, the endemic life on ledges or cliffs that you need wire bugs to get to, the relic records hidden throughout the map you need to zip around to uncover. So much went into making these maps have a symbiotic relationship with the wire bugs, making the gimmick of the wire bugs feel a lot more natural as you use them to explore the maps and what they have to offer. So now that I praised the maps of Rise, it's time to explain some of the negatives. There are mainly two negatives that I want to bring up. The first one is the obvious fact that the maps of Rise are nowhere near as much like an ecosystem as the maps of World. There was so much less attention put to pretty much every aspect that could make a map feel like an ecosystem that the monsters live within. There's much less detail put into the graphics of the maps. There are much less interactions of the monsters and the map, as well as interactable spots in the map. Basically, anything that would make a map more like an ecosystem, World surpasses Rise in. Essentially, the maps of Rise, I'd say, are best described as straightforward. It's easy to traverse, you know where you have to go, and you fight. Now, this is not something that bothers me as much, but I know there are some people who love the liveliness that World's maps have, which is why I had to bring this up. The other negative part about the maps of Rise is how finicky the walls can be at times. I am sure you have all experienced this too, but every so often I'll be climbing a wall and all of a sudden my hunter just starts climbing in place. Having the walls being developed with wire bugs in mind is nice, but not everywhere can truly accommodate the ability to let the hunters climb because certain spots are downright janky, which can be a mild nuisance at times to deal with. Not the end of the world, but it's still a downside. So, now I have given my opinions on both the maps of World and the maps of Rise, meaning it is time to make the decision as to which one has better maps. And I must point out that the maps of World and Rise have completely different objectives. World revolves much more around a complete immersive experience, truly trying to mimic an ecosystem. Rise, on the other hand, takes a completely different direction, as the maps are much more combat oriented. And with this being said, I must say that the game with the best maps goes to neither. Saying one has better maps than the other would be a fallible conclusion. It ultimately boils down to personal preference, like everything really. But if I'm going to give my opinion on it, I would say that the maps of Rise are better because the ease of traversability in the more open areas is much more favorable for my personal preferences, and it makes it feel more old school, which is something that I really like. Now that I've given my opinion, thanks for watching, and let me know which game you think has better maps in the comments, and why you think it's more preferable than the other. And with all this said, don't get yourself lost in the ancient forest, and I will see you in the next one.